G'day Snow Monkeys, it's Painey here from Extreme Boardriders on Jetty Road at Glenelg. We stock a lot of snowboarding equipment here, and when people first buy their first board, there's a lot of questions involved about where do I start. So here's a couple of pointers to get you guys and girls in the right direction of the questions we're going to ask. So a couple of things we're going to ask when you buy a new snowboard is, first thing is, your ability. That will be sort of dictating the flex and how bendy the board is. If it's a really soft board, that's going to be a little bit easier. Boards that bend into turns are going to be easy to turn, going to be a lot more forgiving. So if you're still a beginner intermediate rider, you're going to find the softer boards are better. And as you get more advanced, the stiffer boards are going to be better. So that's the first thing, is basically the flex or the feel of the board. The other thing we're going to ask you is how big your feet are. This is sort of a little bit more for guys with bigger feet. We do tend to find that anything over 11.5 US and wider, we go to a wider board so that the toes and the heels aren't overhanging the board. You don't want toe drag, you don't want heel drag, you want a nice balanced sort of boot sitting right in the middle of the board. So a little bit wider boards for the bigger feet, certainly 11.5 and upwards there. Probably a little bit more so for sort of 10 ladies upwards for that as well, a little bit wider boards. And the other thing is the length of the board. There's always that misconception that everyone comes in and goes, oh, nose to chin height is about right. And that sort of, is a reasonably accurate way of doing it. But when we're looking at boards, your board information on the back really never asks how tall you are. It generally asks how heavy you are, because your weight is what flexes the board, not your height. The only thing that will change with your height generally is going to be your stance width. Taller people have longer legs and a slightly bigger stance, but of course all the boards you can change the stance width on them. Generally speaking, there'll be 3 boards you can buy, sizes you can buy out of a board range. The smaller one's going to be a little bit more park oriented. The very big one's going to be a float better and powder and probably carve better. You want an all-rounder, you buy about the middle size in the middle of your weight range. So that's 3 things we look at, is the flex relative to your ability, the board width relative to your foot size, and then the length of the board relative to your weight. So they're pretty easy things to work out. Other things we do look at is the shape of the board. There's something called the bend in a board, and that is really when we're looking side on a board like so. The bend is the shape in there. Traditionally, boards were all just camber. That sort of came out of ski manufacturing and still quite relevant today. So this little mud map I've drawn here shows some very simple way to look at the bend of the board. The first one is the camber, where the board raises up in the middle. That's what this Burton process is. That lifts up in the middle there. So that gives you a really good edge hold, because when you stand on the board, you're pressing down in the middle of the camber. It pushes the tips into the snow. So those tips want to grab and bite, and that gives you a really good edge control. It feels powerful. It really ollies and springs really well, so it will spring out of turns when you're carving. That's what camber's all about, good edge control. Not quite as forgiving, because the tips are going to be pushing down into the snow. And when you're riding, and if you want that edge hold, you're riding steeps, you're riding harder, you're riding faster, you're popping ollies, big landings on down slopes where you want instant edge hold to give you control on the hard pack when you land. That's what camber's all about. Flying V is something called a rocker camber combination, where the board has rocker like that, like a surfboard would have, but a pure rocker board's not going to give you much